postponed about a month. And so welcome and thank you for coming. I'm here to introduce Mark Kinsella, who has had his glass works in the dining room cabinets for about a month now. I know Mark from the Hillsborough Gallery of Arts, where he was a member for a couple of years, and where Mark was talking to the microphone. Mark tells me that he spent most of his life as a photographer, and in 2005 discovered fused glass and has been going at it ever since. And I hope he'll tell us a little bit more about how he does it. Thanks.
Yeah. How y'all doing?
Fine.
Okay, so far. Good. Can you hear me okay? Do we need the microphone? Okay. Right. All right. So as Marcy said, is that better? Yeah. How about that? Put it right there. Okay. Did you say Beyonce?
Do it like Beyonce does.
No, I can't throw it like it's hot. Just can't do it. So Marcy said it right. I've been doing this since about 2005, and I like to blame my wife, Kathy, for my glass addiction. Kathy was a stained glass artist, and she saw a video or a show on PBS about fusing glass. And we said that would be neat. So I bought her a kiln for her birthday, just a little tiny kiln. And we melted some glass. It was fun. We were terrified of fusing glass. And we put it outside on our brick walkway, and we're just totally afraid to have it inside the house. And I'll tell you why that's funny in a little bit, but we learned it. And then Kath and I took a class together as a date weekend kind of thing, so we could go out and we would learn how to do glass. And then I was hooked from there on in, and I had been doing it ever since. I've taken maybe 5 or 6 classes, and I'm mostly self-taught. And the reason I say it's kind of funny that we put the kiln outside is that now I have one in my kitchen, I had one in my mud room, I've got another one in my dining room, so we have kilns all over the house. And in the wintertime, it's kind of nice because when we fire the kiln on that end of the house, it really warms up that side of the house. And we've actually had it warm enough in the house that the air conditioner has come on when it was 20 degrees outside. So you can see we kind of progressed away from the fear of the glass. My glass technique has really changed over the years. And I'm going to show you a couple of pieces of, well, one of my early pieces that kind of demonstrate how different things have gone. So this is one.
Suggest that you do not say you're going to show a piece of glass.
Okay.
It just seems like just a piece.
Well, yeah.
Sorry,
Gotcha. No, I got you. I'm just going to show a piece. I'm going to pass this around for you to look at, but one of the things I really want you to look at is the edges on this piece. Now, there's a lot of individual cut strips of glass, and they're 1/4 of an inch thick. And cutting glass that thin took a lot of practice. It took me a lot. And this is one of my first successful ones. And I was really proud of this piece. I really thought that I had come...
Get up, stand up, Ann. She knows.
She's from the New York Times. I hope.
Excellent.
Would that were so.
I gotcha.
Have a seat.
Now speak up.
I will. Can you hear me back there okay? Okay. Okay, good. So this is one of the pieces, one of my very first pieces after we had progressed from our little kiln to our bigger kiln. And you'll see that it's very different from the work that I do now. The edges are not smooth. There's no borders in here. There's some defects in the front that I noticed that maybe most folks wouldn't. I was really proud of this piece when I did it. But when I look at it now, it's kind of cringeworthy for me to look at it and compare it to what I used to do. So why don't we just kind of pass that around. That process is one of my favorite. It's cutting strips of glass, and it's very meditative for me because it's a repetitive process that I can just do over and over and over again. And there is no piece that I can't reuse, which I tend to do. If I have a piece like that I'm not too particularly thrilled with, I'll break it and use it in something else, or I'll cut it and use it in something else. And this is an example of a piece like that. These pieces were actually glass that didn't work. So I put it back in the kiln, and I took a metal hook, and I raked the glass while it was at 1700 degrees. I reached into the hot kiln and pulled my hook through it to get these patterns. And then I would cut these patterns out of the glass and then incorporate it into these strips of glass. You also notice that when I pass this around, you'll see that this is two colors of glass that are cutting here. There's a French vanilla and a teal, and one has lead and one has sulfur, and they react with each other to cause this gray gradation in the middle. So not only can you just use two colors of glass to get a lot of different palettes, and you get that same kind of different colors in here, chemistry in the glass comes in, and I never thought that chemistry would ever be valuable to me as an adult when I was in school, but it does now. So I'm going to pass this around as well. And notice when you're passing this one around, the edges and how different and how smooth and clean they are compared to the piece that's going around. So why don't we just start back over here, and we'll send that around. So my process has evolved over years to go from geometric designs to fluid designs, and then I take those fluid designs and put them into geometric pieces. I don't like things that are just one piece without other elements. As you can see, if you've been through the dining room, you can see some of my work that's on display in there. Another piece that I have, which will show you more of that reusing of glass that was broken. So this piece was probably 400 or 500 pieces of glass, individual pieces. All of these are individual strips, but they're all one color. So they look like they're two colors, but that's where that chemistry comes into play, where it reacts with itself when it gets to a certain temperature, so it turns white when it's touching itself, which is kind of interesting. The piece, yeah. So when it's just doing its own thing, right? So it's kind of like an adolescent reaching its. These pieces here are other pieces that didn't quite work. So I melted them into. I take pieces of kiln shelf, or it's like a porcelain or a tile that you can use when you're putting on your floor. You could cut it to dam the pieces, the glass, from flowing out when it gets up to about 1700 degrees. And you dam it to get its shape. And then I cut that into slices and then book match them so that you can get the mirror images to combine and then incorporate them into other pieces. So when you look at something like this, if you look at half of it, you'd see what the design actually was. And then when it's book matched, you can see the two together. So I'm going to kind of pass this around for you guys to kind of feel it. But also note the edges on this one as well. They're really smooth. And I'll talk about the edges.
Somebody ever broken one of those glasses?
Has anybody broken one? I've broken plenty of them. I have. I have, over the years, gone from doing my cold work, which is the polishing part, by hand, by taking diamond pads that are different grades of sandpaper, but they're diamond-coated hand pads, like a sanding block. And I would do them by hand, and that's what that first one that's going around is. You get tired of doing it after a while. Then I read a book on how to be more efficient and use this grit that you can mix with water, and it makes a paste, and you do it on glass, and you can do it for hours and hours and hours. That got a little hard for a while. I got really good and buff, but you kind of get meditative, and you kind of lose your technique after a while. So then I thought, well, I could do it with that, or I could do bigger diamond pads, and I could do it by hand. So I did it by hand some more. I said, well, there's got to be a machine that I can get that will do that for me. So there is, and you could buy plans to build one, I'm not very mechanical, so I had somebody build it for me. And I have this big machine that has a 24-inch wheel in it that spins around. You put a magnetic disc on it that's a diamond-coated disc, and you start with a 60 grit, which is really coarse, and you go on up to like a 600 and then polishing pad. And it can take hours, but it doesn't take days anymore. So what used to take me days now takes me hours, and you get that nice smooth edge. And I think that's what takes glass from a craft to more of an art. They're all functional and fun to make. And I really enjoy it. The process for me is really, I start with a very vague concept of what I want. A shape, maybe some colors, and then I start putting pieces together. And there's not really a thought process behind it of what I intend for a piece to be. I kind of let it do what it's going to do, and it becomes what it's going to become by the time I'm done. And I can start in a direction and be working on it and then change it halfway through it, and it'll be totally something different again. So it's really a good meditative process that I just kind of let happen when I'm in the studio. And you don't need a lot of space to do something like this. I was saying that I have a lot of kilns in my house. Well, my wife has been very indulgent. We do have a 16-inch kiln on a butcher block in my kitchen. My dining room hasn't been used as a dining room in over 10 years because that's where I cut my glass. Our mudroom isn't used as a mudroom because I had a kiln in there for so long. My front porch, which is one of the reasons we bought our house, has this wraparound porch. It's gorgeous. It's out in the middle of the woods, beautiful setting. We can go out there and watch deer. But my wet work machine is out there. My tile saw is out there. All my glass is out there. All my finished pieces are out there in bins. So it's just everywhere. So you don't really need a lot of space. You can kind of fill what you have with your space. Do you have a question? Yeah.
When you reach into the kiln, what kind of protection must you have?
So that's a great question. It depends on, so the question was, when you reach into a kiln, what kind of protection do you have to have? Well, the first thing you want to think about is for your eyes, right? Because the elements are burning at an infrared temperature that can damage your eyes over time. So I have infrared goggles. They're green. They're stronger than welder's glasses, kind of, and you can see through them. The second thing is all cotton clothes. You don't want anything polyester, right? Because if you reach into a kiln that's at 1700 degrees, that polyester is going to burn and stick to you, right? So it'll melt. So cotton clothes. The other thing that you do are gloves. Depending on how long you're going to be in the kiln and if you're touching anything in there, is the gloves. So I use fireplace gloves when I'm combing because they're very flexible and they just need to keep my hands from burning. I'm not touching anything. I'm reaching in with a hook that's 16 inches long, and I reach in, comb it, and pull out. Oh, it's a stainless steel hook. That's this wire that has a little hook on the end of it. No point on the end of it because you don't want it to dig into it. It just kind of pulls right through it, and it's got a little wooden handle on it. And when you get done pulling it through, you have to dip it in water to cool it off because you want it to be cool when you go back in to touch the glass again. The other part is if you're going to go in there and touch the molds or anything to reposition them, because as you're watching the pieces melt, you want to make sure that they're straight. And if they're not melting and they're not falling in the manner that you want them to, you can reach in there and tilt the mold a little bit to get it straightened out and shim it. You have to be pretty quick, but you're going to wear Kevlar for that. Yeah. How do I shape it? So there's a number of different ways. This piece over here, so the question was, how do I shape my glass? This piece was a round disc when it was finished, and I have this ceramic mold that has that shape, and you lay it on top of it, and you heat the glass up really slowly, and it'll eventually get so soft that gravity will start to take it and it will melt down into it, but not get so hot that it runs and it's still stiff, but it just gets soft. Does that make sense? Yeah, you can also, so you're slumping into ceramics, but you can also slump over stainless steel to do like floral vases that have these wavy pieces that are about this tall. You can, there's a piece in the show, it's out there, it's a bowl about this big that has black on the inside, white on the outside. I don't know if any of you are kind of familiar with that one. So I made a slab of glass, and I took a piece of material, refractory material that won't burn in a kiln. It was square, and I cut a hole in the middle of it. And I put the glass on top of that. And you get it so hot slowly so that the center of it will drop and just use weight and heat to create the pattern. It looks like a blown piece of glass. So it kind of drops out of the center. And you're looking at it as it's dropping and as it's melting and seeing, where is it? Do I stop it here? Do I stop it here? What's the look I want to go for, and how far do I want it to go? Right? When you get done with that piece, you have this square rim on it and then the bowl itself. So I have a tile saw that is a 10-inch saw that's water fed, and you take, and here's the saw blade, you'll take the piece and you'll just very gently push it into the blade so that the blade goes about this far into the glass, and you turn it just a little bit so you're cutting off this rim. And the rim will come off, and then that's when you have to do your cold working to get the edges smooth. If you get that piece too thin, when you let it drop, when you do your cold working, it'll end up chipping it all to pieces. So, do you have a question?
What were the edges like when you took it out of the kiln?
So before it went into this mold, what were the edges like? No?
After you melted it into the mold.
That's it right there. Just like that. Yeah. So you do all your cold working before you do your slumping. The slump is the very last step in the process. And the slump is where it gets its shape, right? So you do all your cold working and all of your work, and then once it goes into the slumping, that's pretty much done. And it comes out looking just like that. Yeah? Yeah.
Are your fingers all cut up?
Well, I have one right now. I haven't been in the studio for quite some time. And I was thinking I was going to take some gold leaf and make a piece, and I forgot that when you run your finger across a piece of glass like this, that there's some sharp edges. And I got myself. But typically I don't get cut a lot. If I have been doing it a lot, like if I had left the corporate world for a couple of years to join the gallery with Marcy in Hillsborough to try and be an artist full time, but I just couldn't make a living at it. So I went back to the corporate world and I do it on the side. But say that again? Oh, so if I'm doing it a lot, I'm more aware and I don't get cut. But when I haven't done it in months like just recently, then I'll get cut. One of the most valuable lessons I ever learned with glass is to, if a piece of glass is falling, let it fall. Don't ever try to catch it, right? Right? So you try to catch that thing when it's falling, you'll catch an edge and you'll cut yourself. The second piece of that advice is always wear closed-toed shoes. Don't be in there in your flip-flops or bare feet, you know. And when I was doing this full time, I would roll out of bed, grab a cup of coffee, and mosey up to the cutting table and start working. And then I'd have to remember to get my shoes, because not only do you have pieces falling, but you have to worry about pieces that may have broken and fallen and hit the ground. So the process is really meditative for me, and it's just fun, and I get to work with all these colors. I buy sheets of glass that are 20 inches wide, 35 inches long, and I have them shipped to my house, and then I cut them into pieces. And if you notice the pieces that are going around, those strip pieces, I can do that for hours. I can just sit there, and I've been known to, at 2 o'clock in the morning, get an idea, get up, run downstairs, and start working, or drawing, or trying to get it out on a piece of paper. Yep, that's a good question. So to cut those, who said carefully? Exactly. What you do is you determine how many you're going to need, or about how many. And you cut a piece of glass, the length that you need and the width that you need. And then you'll cut that in half. And then you're always scoring and cutting in half. So if I want to get down to 1/4 of an inch, I'll cut a 2-inch piece, then I'll cut those into 1-inch pieces, then I'll cut those into 1/2-inch pieces, and then I'll cut them into 1/4-inch pieces. So you're breaking them with running pliers. So there are these pliers that have these curves in them. They're like that. So the bottom comes up to them. And what it will do will split the glass along the score. So you score it with a carbide cutting tool. Remember in the movies when they would cut the glass and then they would punch the hole in it? It's that same kind of tool that you would score it and then you just break it. And you can break them by hand to a certain extent, down to about the 1-inch piece, and then after that you have to use a pair of pliers to cut them. And I have probably hundreds of pieces already cut, just waiting to get put into a project. When you're making the pieces that you pull and you create the patterns with, you cut those into bigger pieces. So they're easy to cut because you can cut them into 3/8 or 3/4 inch and then pull through the glass and then let it melt out until it gets to the thickness that you want. And glass, when it melts, wants to get to about 1/4 inch. So if you start with a piece that's 4 inches and you leave it in the kiln long enough, it's going to spread out until it gets nice and thin.
And this is all cold glass.
It starts out cold and then goes into the kiln to become fused, to become, yeah, but it's all cold. Yeah, yeah. And cold to an extent. 60 degrees, 65 degrees is about where I like to keep it. If I have it on the porch in the middle of the winter, I bring it in the house to let it warm up because cold glass is brittle and it wants to run and break in different patterns that you don't want. Yeah.
Okay.
That it?
I think
Okay.
we should stop.
Okay. Thank y'all. Thanks.